I remember back then when I came here, I would actually write letters. I would actually take a pen and paper and write. I would write to my girlfriend at the time. I would write a letter and I'll wait 2-3 months for the response to come in.
Wow.
And then you find that in a year you receive maybe 2-3 mails or 4 mails because it will take time.
Born and raised in the motherland, chasing a better life, story of an immigrant.
Concrete pastures.
Concrete pastures.
Concrete pastures.
Hello, family. You are listening to Concrete Pastures. I am Nancy Mlemwa-Sisi. Being an immigrant has been one of the most challenging and extraordinary experiences of my life. It inspired me to create a platform to reach out to my fellow immigrants and dreamers. The goal is to provide a space for myself and others to share our stories as we deconstruct the world's view of immigrant status. We discuss issues that are important to us in the diaspora. We celebrate the joys, the laughs, the bravery that being an immigrant brings. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We appreciate your support. To all of our new listeners, welcome to the family. You can continue to support us by downloading our new app for free on Google Play. You get access to our whole Concrete Pastures library. While you are there, feel free to support us by giving us a donation. We are an independent podcast. You can also buy our merchandise. 50% of the proceedings go back to our veteran that makes them. You can also support us by subscribing or following us on all social media platforms. Thank you so much to everybody who has been writing reviews on different platforms that you're listening on and DMing us on how you are loving the episodes. Thank you so much. We love hearing from you. Our guests love hearing from you. So if you know anybody who is coming to the US of A here in New York, if that person is you, the truth is many of us arrive to the new destination feeling all inspired, ready to write your new chapter in the new country. Concrete Pastures want to help you integrate. Nobody makes it alone in a new country, and we want to make sure that you integrate the right way. We want to support you, whether you have somebody here or not. We want to make sure that we support you when you come here. So if you are that person and you are in your country, you have your visa, you're ready to come, feel free to reach out to us. We have the link tree in the show notes. Click on it. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be able to help you, even to answer just a few questions, even about weather, what to wear, or how to get a job. What does that look like? All right. We offer a wrapped around service based on your needs, so you fully and successfully integrating in your new country. All right. Can't wait to hear from you. Thank you so much, FMG Radio, for continuing to give us visibility on your platform. On today's episode is a 2-part conversation. There was a lot to unpack with our next guest. I am so grateful. He is someone I respect, someone I've been admiring from afar, and I'm grateful to have him here today. Mr. Noah Ndhlovu is a multi-talented individual. He is an Afrocentric Philosopher of Science, public intellectual, an award-winning author, poet, podcast host, and a community leader. He is the founding president of the Zambian Association Network of the United States, ZANUS, and the Zambian Association of Indiana. He is also the chairman for Primier Media. Welcome.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here to share some moments. I am glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so honored to have you here. For starters, you are my countrymates. You're from Africa, from Zambia. I'm just interested to know what Zambia was like for you. Do you mind sharing just a little bit of what it was like being in Zambia before you came to the US of A?
Sure. I grew up in Lusaka. I was born and bred and raised in the great city of Lusaka. I never traveled much outside Lusaka. I think the furthest I'd gone in Lusaka was Fera. I grew up in a little town called Fera, and most people refer to it as Luangwa. So my parents used to work for Zambia Airways before it disappeared under the privatization, but my father had gone for further studies in the UK. So my brother and I were conveniently sent to Luangwa, a place called Fera. So that's where I started my grade 1 and 2. Was back then in the early 80s. Wow, it's amazing what time can do. So I grew up there I spent a little bit of time that side, and then I went back to Lusaka when my parents came back from the UK, and I continued my education in Lusaka. I went to Munali, completed at Munali.
Wow.
Previously, it used to be Munali Boys. I think in 1995, I think that's when the girls were incorporated into the school. But previously, it used to be Munali Boys, and then it changed to Munali High School. So I completed high school in 1997 at Munali. So growing up in Zambia, I have a lot of fond memories. Especially in my little town of Fera. But most of my education was done in Lusaka. When I completed high school, an opportunity, I worked a little bit for Professor Mwenichanya. He used to be the Vice Chancellor of UNZA back then, and an opportunity came up in late 2009-ish to come to the United States. So, and then I've been here since 2000. So that's a little bit about my background. We can talk a little bit more about the stories from Fera if you want.
Yes, please do share. The thing is, this is the first time I'm hearing about Fera. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Mongu most of my years in Zambia. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time I'm hearing about Fera. So I'd love to know, how was life there? Who was living in Fera? Your parents or?
No, my grandmother, because my dad and mom had gone to the UK because my father worked for Zambia Airways at the time. He used to be one of the accountants. So he had been sent there for further schooling, education, I believe. And he went with my mom and my other immediate brother. So myself and my older brother, we were sent to, it's actually considered to be part of Lusaka district or Lusaka province. So Fera or Luangwa is mostly known for the Luangwa River.
Yes.
And also the fish, because there is a lot of fish. They will say, oh, this is Luangwa fish.
Yes.
So it's at the border of, on the other side, you can actually see Mozambique on one side, and on the other side, you could see Zimbabwe. So wow. I spent about 2 years of my time when I was just a little boy, because I started my first grade at Luangwa Primary School. And at the time, my brother and I stayed with my grandmother. This is on my mother's side. So she took care of us when my parents, like I said, they were up in the UK for further studies. And when they came back, then we went back to Lusaka to join them. But the fond memories that I have for Luangwa, because there was one time when the Luangwa Bridge had flooded. And I remember clearly we would cross when there was no water, we would walk across. But on this particular day, it had rained so heavily that the path where we used to path when it's ordinary dry day, it was flooded. And this was back in 1985. I was just a little penguin, just a little guy. So we had to, because we would pay a teningwe. I remember clearly, even the animal which was on the teningwe. I don't know if now people even use those coins. But
no, I left that. I don't think we were using coins when I left in 2002.
Yeah, because now this is back in 1985. A long time ago. So we would pay some people, obviously, because we were young, to take us across to the other side. So on this particular day, it had flooded so much, and then the friend that we were with didn't have the turning way to pay those guys to take us across. So we decided that it would be best for us all to just to cross, to sort of take the chance and swim across. And I was this little guy, my brother and the other friend. His name, I lost contact. His name is Joe. So we put our books, because back then we didn't even have a backpack.
Mm-hmm.
We would put books in those plastics where you put bread.
Yes, the ones with the lines.
Oh, yeah. So we just put the books in there, and then we held them on top of our heads like this. And then we made it across. So that's one of the fond memories. And then obviously the fish, because my grandparents would go, obviously he was a fisherman. He would go and he would bring us all kinds of fish. But in 1985, I was just a little boy. But I still have fond memories of just growing up around that time and seeing the people eating the natural food. The food that we have across here. I just have fond memories of growing up in Luangwa and just missing. I wish I could go back. But if you invent a time machine, I would love to go and spend a little bit of time back then and just to take in the scenery, because we would go and hunt, and we would go and just do all kinds of things in a little bush with some friends. So now when I look back, I'm like, oh, those were the times.
Your imagination work was like at its peak.
Oh yeah,
and the bravery, you guys crossing the river. Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, you see, now kids nowadays, they're always exercising their thumbs on these electronics. But back then we didn't have electronics, so it was a beautiful time just to enjoy nature and to be outside. Because I remember back then we would spend most of our time outside. The parents would come and stand by the door and they would scream out your name, and then they're calling you back. But now the kids of nowadays, they're always indoors. You can hardly get them out there. So it's the complete opposite of the time that we grew up to the time that we have today. Yeah,
no, that's beautiful though. You reminded me also of my childhood just now, the fishing. I remember when I used to go visit my grandmother on my dad's side, to get mosquito nets, because she couldn't afford to buy the nets, the actual fish nets. So we would get the mosquito nets, and that's what we would use to catch those nice small fish. Oh my God. Yeah. You just took me there.
We had the mosquito net, I remember, obviously, because it used to get very hot, but I'm told now it gets very hot in Zambia.
Very. I've heard the same.
So we would actually sleep outside. That's one of my fond memories. We would actually sleep outside, and it was safe. No crime. It was just nothing like I think the times have changed, but I remember a few times we would actually sleep outside with my grandpa and my brother. So fond memories.
Wow, pretty cool. So you come from Luangwa, your parents are back in Lusaka. you finish your grade 12 and you start working for UNZA?
No, so I worked for the Vice Chancellor, Professor Mwandechanya, who used to have a little company called Cyberlinks at Findeco House. So I completed in 1997. And so let me backtrack a little bit. So I spent about 3 years in Rwanda from 85 to about 87. Mm-hmm. And then when my parents were in the UK. So my parents come back to Lusaka and then we joined them. So I completed my primary in Lusaka, and then my high school in 97. When I completed, I worked for a company, which the first company that I worked for was, unfortunately, the gentleman died. It was owned or co-owned by Professor, it's been a while, the name has even escaped me. But I worked for the second company. It was owned by two German couple, Ricky and the lady's name was Ricky, and the husband was semi-based in Lusaka and also in Germany. I think they had a company, Habitats, if you remember going into town, somewhere near North Mead, there was a place called Habitats. Most of the towels, I think, were manufactured by, or the company that made most of those available in Zambia was a company called Habitats. So they had a different company called FirstNet. So the first company that I worked for in Zambia was called FirstNet. So when I transitioned from FirstNet, then I worked for Professor Mwandechanya, who had a company at the Findeco House. So I worked Findeco House a little bit back in the late 90s, and an opportunity came up to come to the US, and then I've been here ever since.
Oh, wow. So when you came to the US, where did you go? You came straight to Indiana?
No, so when I came to the US, there's a little place again in Michigan, most people may not know. So the first place that I went to when I came from Zambia, I went to a university called Michigan Technological University, which is in a place called Holton. So if you ask most people from Michigan, they have no idea. There's a place called Holton. It's right on the edge close to Canada. So that's the first place I went to because I was there at the school. And I remember when I got to, obviously, landed at Detroit and then made my way to Greyhound, to get on Greyhound to go to this place. So I was asking the people, my friend and I, asking the workers, people who work for Greyhound, hey, I'm trying to get to this place. And they had to consult. I don't know this place. Oh, so wow. There's a place called Holton. It's in Michigan. I don't know. Have you heard of that place? No,
I mean, I've been to Michigan.
Because most people, when they think of Michigan, is Detroit, Niles, and these other places. But I think it's a little town. It's out there. Check it out.
I've never. I'll look it up now. Holton.
That's the first place I went there, in a little town called Holton, where they have this huge university, Michigan Technological University.
How was it adjusting? Because I know Michigan is super cold. You're coming from Zambia, which, I mean, we have all these different seasons, but not compared to the American weather and how it is in Michigan, for sure. How was it adjusting to everything, really?
Yeah, I think it's over 20 years, so it's been a while. So I think at that time I was much younger. It was a newer version of myself. It's 20 years removed.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, so I didn't really have a problem adjusting to the environment, the weather. Obviously, it was cold because I got to the school. It was somewhere in May, and there was a little bit of snow still on the ground, because usually by March, for the most part, then snow will sort of be drying out in most places. But this place, we had, because obviously I was looking forward to seeing snow for the first time, coming from Zambia, you only hear about snow. But I didn't really, maybe it's because I was much younger, the body functioning at very high capacity and things like that. It wasn't really much of a challenge for me. I quickly adjusted, and before you know it, I became used to the climate, the environment, the weather. So I know others, I've heard stories from friends who have a hard time, especially adjusting to a very cold climate, cold environment, to dealing with snow. But for me, I guess maybe I was just, like I said, maybe being youthful when the body is very at topmost. Yeah, like when you get in the 40s now, it's like, oh, my neck, oh, my back.
Sciatica. Everything hurts.
Oh, yeah.
Listen, it's the mature age. Age. When you get the mature age. But that's good that you didn't have any challenges. But for me, I haven't still gotten used to the weather. I mean, I love it here, but still, I just like you, I was looking forward to seeing the snow. And the first time when the snow fell, I was just like, okay, I went outside, I wore my Timberlands, went outside, played in it for a little bit. I was just like, okay, that's it, experienced it. And it was like 6 inches, a lot of it here. So that was my experience with that.
Yeah. I think, I don't think people get used to maybe, I guess, people who, like in Alaska, where it gets super frigid cold. But I think for me, it's you adjust your time, because there's really nothing much you can do about it.
Yeah.
You just bundle up when it's snowing, you just bundle up, or you stay indoors. Like right now, obviously we're expecting some winter blizzard storm.
Yeah.
But for the most part, just stay indoors and get away from if you can. But I know there are folks who have to work on the outside. I mean, that I know I don't know how.
It's brutal. The construction.
Yeah, the construction workers, I know it's something else. So, more power to them. But I think been fortunate enough, at least, to have been a little bit privileged, maybe if I could say, to not have found myself where I needed to be, especially in the cold weather, working outside. Yeah. So it's adjusting to the weather for the most part. It hasn't really been much of a hassle.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you go to your college. Were you there the whole time? You graduated from there?
Yeah, so I didn't finish. I transferred from there to one of the local colleges here in Indiana, because there was a time when it was a little bit expensive. I'm sure, when you come as an international student.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah, so the fees, it's something else. But the good thing is I was able to complete my education. I took some time off, and then I completed my education. So fast forward, I went to a local college called Ivy Tech. So Ivy Tech is one of the community colleges. So I did my 2 years there. I have my associate degree is in general studies. And there I transferred because I was actually going for biological technology, associate in biological technology. Then one of my friends says, hey, just transfer your classes and then go to this university. Then you can do another program there. It's much easier. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I think I just wanted to, I guess I got tired of the community college. Then I'm like, no, let me just go back to the university. So at the time I had enough classes, so I transferred. I was able to graduate, not transfer. I was able to graduate with an associate degree, and then I went to Indiana University, where I completed my bachelor's degree, and then after my bachelor's degree, I enrolled into master's program. So I completed 2 master's programs. So I was fortunate enough, at least, to have completed my education, pushing it up where I felt very comfortable. I have 2 master's degree. One is in environmental health science, and then the other one is in health policy management. So at least as far as the education, it worked out for me.
That's amazing. I ask because all of us have different stories when it comes to we come here and some of the challenges that we face. And I went to community college because that's what I could afford, because I was working and paying for my own way to go to college. So when you go into university, super duper expensive. Even going to a community college, you're still paying as an international student more than the residents. So that's what I try to give to our listeners as to it's expensive to go to school unless you're coming with a scholarship that's paying for everything. Thank you for clarifying that. So you got into the health department. You work for the health department. From the time you graduated from university, you work for the health department, specifically the HIV, correct me if I'm wrong, PrEP program?
Yes. So when I graduated with my master's degree, I got a job at, ideally, let me backtrack a little bit. So my concentration, one of them is environmental health science. So ideally, I was hoping to get a gig with the EPA. So at that time, the EPA were not hiring, or I didn't really have something that appealed to me at the time. And sometimes, there's limitations with these openings. So my next best bet was to apply at the health department, because it's pretty much in the same sphere, public health. So I got in with the Indiana Department of Health. I started out as a public health administrator, and my specific role was to work in the department or division of HIV, STD, and viral hepatitis. So I was working in a department called HIV prevention. So started out working as a consultant specialist. Then I moved up to working as a HIV testing program manager. And then now I went up as the PrEP program director or program manager. So PrEP, for those people who may not know, it stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. So this is an acronym or short abbreviation for the medication for people who are at a very high risk for contracting HIV. So it's more like family planning, because people take family planning to prevent getting pregnant. Yeah. So now PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, it's taking medication to prevent the acquisition of HIV.
Being an immigrant can be hard. Having been away from my home country for over 20 years has allowed me to experience these hardships firsthand. Throughout my journey, I've had a lot of challenges that were hard to bear. Juggling adjustment to a new country, obtaining my immigration papers, getting married, having children, establishing my career, and finding time for myself. Even though I've always had faith, I also relied on therapy, which gave me the tools to cope with the issues life brought me. My fellow dreamers, let's remove the stigma around therapy and normalize seeking help with today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Go to betterhelp.com/concretepastures for 10% off your first month of therapy with BetterHelp. and get matched with a therapist who will listen and help in as little as 48 hours.
So in most cases, that can be further broken down in people who are in a discordant couples, or couple where one person has HIV or the other person doesn't have. So the person who is usually on HIV, they take their retroviral therapy medication or ART, and the person who is in a relationship with that person, in order for them to prevent themselves from catching the virus, then they take PrEP. So this obviously, as a public health professional, I mean, I can talk freely, because obviously when having sex, most people cannot manage or contain the use of the condom. So I think at some point, people have to say, okay, instead of me just using the condoms every time, then let me just be on this medication, so that at least as long as your viral load, if you are taking the medication, there's adherence, the viral load for the person who has HIV reduces. And then the person who doesn't have HIV or is at a higher risk because they are dating somebody who has HIV, then they take the medication. So there is a campaign called U equals U, which means undetectable is untransmittable. For a person who has HIV, as long as they are taking the medication, then the viral load in their body, or the virus's content in the body, reduces because of the medication that they take. It gets to a point where the viral load the virus is undetectable in the system. It doesn't mean that it's been cured. It's at a very low percentage, to an extent that when they have sexual intercourse with a person who is living without HIV, the virus is not passed on to the other person. So that's the campaign which some of us who are working in this field, we are very excited, because the more people take the medication, the more HIV will more likely become a thing of the past, because there's two spheres of focus. Those who are taking HIV, they're taking the medication, and those who are not, those who are at a higher risk, they're also taking the medication, because that's how now the virus is going to be contained. So this is one of the things that we're excited about in the HIV arena, the U equals U, and especially the pre-exposure prophylaxis. So it's one of the things that at least we are pushing out there as much as possible, especially when you look at where we are coming from. Back home in Africa, back home in Zambia, last I checked, it was over 12% of the population, they are living with HIV. And when you look at here in the United States, it's just a small percentages of less than 2% of the US population, they are living with HIV. So the contrast, I mean, it's just very wide. So the prevalence of HIV back home is just way out of control. So I think with strategies such as PrEP, I think it will help to ensure that HIV is a thing of the past, or it's not, it's contained for the most part. Because one of the initiatives by the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and also the World Health Organization under the United Nations, they are pushing for what is called ending the HIV epidemic. Because the HIV epidemic has been around since the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And it has really devastated our people. So ending the HIV epidemic obviously just simply means with these initiatives, PrEP at U equals U. So most likely by 2030, the projection is at least we'll be seeing the incidence rates for HIV at least is going to be reduced. So that's what we are hoping for.
Wow. When I saw that, like I was on your LinkedIn and I looked at what you do, this is something that's very close to my heart. And I'm always either at work donating to RED and to contributing and seeing or constantly reading on what work is being done to try to, I guess, get to the end of this epidemic. Like, it's been long, but before I even go into that, what got you into this work? What inspired you to get into this space?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful question. I think I got into this HIV work, one, looking at the background where some of us are coming from, looking at the backdrop of Africa, and the prevalence of this disease is just way out of control. When you look at countries like Botswana, and you look at countries like South Africa, and even our home country, Zambia, the incidence and the prevalence rate are very high compared to these other countries. So it was my way of wanting to do something meaningful. Like I say, my initial take was to work for the environmental health, environmental agency, the EPA, because my background is mostly on the science part of that, and my goal was to work as an environmental engineer. And I looked at what's the second best option if I can't get there. The first option. So getting myself in this field was one way of just helping to contribute to the ending of this terrible disease, which has impacted and affected most of us. I think if you
a lot of
our people, a lot of families, a lot of people. I think everybody has been impacted, especially in our country. Talking about our country, are you working with any department? I think I on one of your interviews, are you working with the Department of Health in Zambia to implement some of these initiatives that you might be working on, like PrEP? Do we have that in Zambia? Yeah, so PrEP is already on the ground in Zambia, because the first medication for PrEP, which was approved here in the United States, it was a medication called Truvada. It was FDA approved in 2012.
Right.
So back, there were clinical trials. So before medication is put out there are usually clinical trials. And some of these clinical trials, usually they happen, I don't know whether you can say it's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but obviously the prevalence, when I say prevalence, is the more cases, unfortunately, on the African continent. Of course, there are high levels of HIV in Latin America, Brazil, and these other places, but the sub-Saharan Africa for the most part. So this is where some of the clinical trials for this medication conducted. So PrEP is already something that the African continent is aware of. I'm not sure to the extent how it is being implemented and people using that, but yes. So to answer your question, so I personally, I am not engaged directly with the Ministry of Health back home, but my goal is obviously to see how we can coordinate with folks back home. So to that point, there is a conference that we're putting up with some of my friends. We're just sort of in the planning, talking phase or brainstorming to see how we can bring a little bit of value to our country by ensuring that at least we are, because like you say, I mean, obviously, people who have died from HIV or people who have been impacted, and I think we are all touched by that.
Yeah.
So just trying to see how can we work together to implement some of these initiatives and just to have a process map that is doable, because we have a lot of kids, unfortunately, on the continent who obviously some of them, I mean, they were born with the condition.
Yes.
Obviously maybe from the parents and passed on. So just trying to bring about a lot of sensitization. I appreciate the work that is being done by most of the international organizations, but I believe as as an African, as a Zambian, I think it's up to us to do our due diligence to ensure that we're working and coordinating with the folks on the ground to bring about that meaningful change that we hope to see and that we desire. So we are doing everything that we can, especially on my part, to see how we can better position ourselves, number one, as a people, to have these resources, to have the material. We live at a time where we should be very glad and excited because we have the internet. Because we can text. 2 seconds, there are people on the other side, they'll text back. I remember back then when I came here, I would actually write letters. I would actually take a pen and paper and write. I would write to my girlfriend at the time. I would write a letter and I'll wait 2-3 months for the response to come in.
Wow.
And then you find that in a year you receive maybe 2-3 mails or 4 mails because it will take time. Mm-hmm. So my point here is we live at a time where everything is in an instant. So there's no need, even like the children that are born nowadays, is their mindset, their way of internalizing or categorizing information differs from some of us because some of us, we grew up where we had to wait. Imagine you send a letter to your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or relative and you have to wait for 3-4 months.
Wow.
And then sometimes you're lucky you get something in a month or 2. So the point here is we are living at a time where we are very blessed to have this information era where information can easily be shared in an instant. Yes. So hoping to see what we can do with the Minister of Education / Minister of Health back home, because for the folks in Zambia, I'm working for the equivalent of the Ministry of Health. So the agency that I work for is the Indiana Department of Health, where I'm managing this PrEP program. So just trying to figure out what we need to do. So there's a conference that's going to be coming up sometime in this coming year. Obviously, it's going to be centered like how do we as Africans, how do we as Zambians position ourselves to end this epidemic? Because it's not going to be, one of the things that I've seen is like we always wait for somebody else to come and to provide solutions. I believe the challenges to Africa, the problems that Africa has, for instance, HIV and AIDS, is not going to be addressed by the international organizations. Of course, they can help, which is a good thing, but it is going to take the African people, it's going to take the people like you and me as Zambian people to do what we need to do to end this disease, not really hoping for somebody else to come and make the donation here and there. That's always good, but I think we're hoping we can do something with the people back home and at least begin to end or at least to kickstart the process of at least either changing their minds or encouraging people to be more aware in decision making, because information, like I say, is readily available. We have the internet. People are working with the libraries on their phone. They can access almost anything. We have YouTube. I mean, there's social media, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, like everything is at our disposal. It's not like people, they are in Luangwa, they are waiting for years for things to come. No.
3 months for mail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, well said, well said. Why do you think we have a lot of cases in our countries, like Africa, for instance? Because for me, I know it's, a little bit of the stigma around discussing the issue of having it. Mm-hmm. What else do you think is the issue that it continues to spread year over year. There's no change, really. Are we getting the right medication in terms of like the medication that they might have in the US compared to what people in our countries are getting in Africa? Is it the same thing, or it's just a lack of education or the stigma?
Yeah, so again, that's a great question. So it could be both approaches, because I think stigma is one of those things that I don't know if we'll ever get around stigma, because you know our people, they even come up with some terms. Yeah, so it's very sad, unfortunately, because I think it has to start, especially with the people who are living with HIV. For instance, one of the things that I have learned myself is the terminology that is used matters, because I think mostly people, you don't say somebody's infected, because the word infected may seem like a stigmatizing. It may make people feel a certain way about themselves. It sort of has a negative connotation, but I think the education in terms of using the appropriate words. For instance, you don't say somebody's infected with HIV. You say somebody's living with HIV, because somebody could have hypertension or some cardiovascular ailments, but they are still able to function. Yeah. And nobody stigmatizes them. And the challenge with HIV is ensuring that at least we're using the proper wording for some of these terms, ensuring that at least the people have the information, and also working with the people, sensitizing them to know that they have to do everything possible to avoid the acquisition of HIV. I mean, I'll be honest with you, there are some ladies who are those in Zambia who you would say like a prostitute. Mm-hmm. But here, the terminology that we are using, we say sex workers, or the more appropriate word which has been standardized, especially on this part of the world, is you say transactional sex, because you are making a transaction. So I remember, for instance, like you could actually get a visa to go to, if I'm not mistaken, that's New Zealand, to work as a sex worker. People could get, there are some countries, they may have changed now to work. You're
giving people ideas.
Because they're satisfying a need. So now they were encouraging people that people have to be taking good care of themselves. For instance, people who work in these adult industries, they have to get tested before they go and work. Do, because that is considered work for the people who are in the field. Yeah, in that industry, that is considered working. So there's a lot that we need to do as a people, especially when we look at the prevalence and the high numbers that we have, is to ensure that where are we missing the mark? Is the education being sufficient and appropriate? Are we using the right terminologies? And because I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we can clearly say stigma is out of the window, because people have, like I say, people have got these terms like, oh, these people they are loading up, or they, like how you load up your talk time, especially in Zambia. Yeah. They will say, they will stigmatize and have that stereotype for people. That's not helping when it comes to ending this epidemic. And one of the other challenges is some people have lost fear for this disease because people say, oh, we have medicine. So that's one of the challenges, like, there are some sex workers where they are willing to perform the theatrics and the act as long as the price is right.
Wow.
And then this person, because one of my friends was doing an interview, trying, especially in this field industry, they said, no, if I catch HIV, there's medication. So now, how do you counter that? So you see, it's something that I think people have lost the fear of the disease because they feel like, oh, I'll just take the medication and then I'll be fine. Because I know back in the 80s when HIV came on the scene, a lot of people were afraid because HIV at the time was considered this deadly disease. It's a deadly disease.
Yeah. But
with the advancements in technology, medication, and in 1987, the first drug by the FDA was AZT, and then there have been several medications that have been put on the market to contain the disease, and especially on the PrEP side now we even have PrEP. The earliest medication here in the US was Truvada in 2012, and in 2019 there is another medication called Descovy, and they are now the generic kind. Because in the US, I'm not familiar with how the system works in Zambia. When medication is put on the market, there is usually a 10-year patent. So the company that makes Truvada is Gilead. Gilead put out Truvada on the market in 2012 when it was approved. So the patent lasts over somewhere like after 10 years, which means other companies now, Gilead shares the technology for the manufacturing of this disease, of this medication with other companies, and then who can now make it at a much lower cost. So they are.
We have the generic and
the generic brand and the name brand. So the name brand is usually much expensive, but the other companies, because after a period of time, obviously they have recouped their investment in terms of the research and everything else. So at least after 10 years. So it's very difficult to pinpoint the answer to your question, because if you have people who say they will take medication and they are not afraid of that, so it is worrisome for us in public health, because we would like to see a generation where HIV is a thing of the past, but it starts with the people themselves, because I think we need to do a lot of campaigns and education, especially on both sides, for those who are living with HIV, and then for those who are on a higher, they have a high likelihood of catching the HIV, to ensure that at least they are taking PrEP. Just like I alluded to earlier, women who do not want to get pregnant, they go on a pill, or they take some strategies to prevent themselves from getting pregnant. So it's the same thing. If you don't want to, as long as you are sexually active, which is almost everybody above 13, 12. I mean, the CDC had to, one of the recommendation by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control here in the United States, is if you are sexually active, or if you are 13 years and above, you have to go for an HIV test. So ensuring that at least people are going for routine testing, I think that's going to be helpful. So we hope by engaging, especially the education sector, to have some of these curriculum that are tailored to speak to these challenges that the communities are facing, in conjunction with the Ministry of Health having that type of resources available. I think that may mitigate some of these gaps that we see. But otherwise, I wish there was a silver bullet fix to ending the HIV. But, people, if you tell people to, let me say something that obviously most people may not know. Yeah, because when somebody comes to you and tells you, don't have too much sex, obviously people don't want to be told that. But you can say the same thing, but just saying it differently. Because though there are people who understand the dynamics of how things work. For instance, back in the 90s, I think it's still going on to now, where people will say, oh, a woman who is educated is less likely to have more children. So to get around telling people not just to have so many kids is to say, let's promote girl child education. That is a backward way of achieving your goal, because you are still telling people, hey, stop having kids. So, but when you tell people, hey, don't have kids like that, they'll say, no, you can't tell us what to do. So the approach was to strategically or to intelligently say, let's promote girl child education. So most people, yes, let's promote. There's nothing wrong. The people jump on the bandwagon. Okay, let's promote the girl child. But what they're not consciously aware of is that less children, a woman who is more educated is not going to be having 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 kids. So it's doing the same thing, but just approaching it differently. So this is why I think some of these international organizations, they are looking at how do we prevent some of this even population influx, because there are people who look at the world is overpopulated. So one way to contain that is push the idea of promoting girl child education, because that's also one way saying, okay, we're going to slow down the rate of population. Because when you look at Africa has the highest number of the younger generation. And when you look at the Western countries, especially here in the United States, we have mostly an aging population. So it's a strategy that most people may not know, but at least now they know since I've shared that. So it's just figuring out ways of doing certain things, but just being tactful about it. So I think the conference that I'm thinking of is in the same vein, looking at, okay, how do we tell people to not do certain things? For instance, if you tell people to abstain, you are just wasting your time.
That was the message from the beginning. I remember.
Yeah,
abstain.
Yeah, if you tell people to abstain, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like encouraging, like you're pushing them towards the.
Yeah. So it's best for us in public health is we have to be practical. You have to understand that the messaging of telling people, obviously you teach people to abstain, but obviously you have to be practical in the sense that, okay, we have safe-sex kits, condoms, dental dams, and these other tools that can help. We are still trying to figure out from a public health perspective, but otherwise we have a long way to go.
That's it for this episode. Thank you again for lending us your ears. It's truly an honor to serve each and every dreamer. You can continue to support us by liking, sharing, and following us on our social media pages. The links are all in the show notes. We have so many exciting projects and ventures in store for you. Until next time, keep dreaming.
Born and raised in the motherland, chasing a better life. Story of an immigrant.
Concrete pastures.
Concrete pastures.
Concrete pastures.